Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here. It's the first time I'm in this country and this city, so it's really exciting. I just wish I had more time to be outside the hotel, but maybe another time. So I'm Hans-Peter Holen. I'm chair of RIPE, and I'm going to talk to you about the difference between RIPE and RIPE NCC, or if you want to have another twist on it, how we are doing governance or managing the resources in our region, and how I think that the community wants this to be done in the future. So, in addition to being the RIPE chair, I'm currently also on the ICANN NOMCOM, so I get exposed to a bit more than just what's going in this region. Before that, I was on the ICANN Address Council, so this was the farewell gift from our numbering colleagues on the Address Council to me when I stepped down from there. Before becoming RIPE chair, I was also chairing the Address Policy Working Group and have been a member of the community since beginning of the 90s. In my day job, as if I had time for that, I'm working for a company called Visma, mainly in the Nordics. We actually have a daughter company also operating in Serbia. You may have heard of it, Lupia, doing domain names and hosting. And I'm currently spending part of my time in the hosting division, cleaning up some of the operations in the domain name business. I don't usually admit doing domain names publicly, but since I'm here, then I thought I could mention that as well. So I'll start with some history lesson. One of the questions I get when I walk around is RIPE chair, RIPE NCC. Well, Nigel is chairman of the RIPE NCC executive board. What are you doing? So what's the difference between RIPE and RIPE NCC? So RIPE as a community was formed in 1989, and it was set up, a group of people met in Europe to solve all the issues of internet in Europe. That should be done in a couple of meetings, I've been told by the former chair, Rob Loxheim. So the meetings were open to everybody, and they took care of all aspects of internet, like not only IP addressing, but also how to share connectivity and domain names and so on in the beginning. And they created policies by consensus, and we still do that. So meeting, discussing, and achieving at the consensus on how to work together. And in order to do so, they soon had to divide the work into working groups. So the RIPE community works in working groups. And here you can see the RIPE logo. So in '92, they figured out that, well, it's good to have an open community with all volunteers, but maybe we need some staff to take care of some of the coordination activities for us. So RIPE Network Coordination Center was formed. And if you wonder what RIPE is for, it's actually an abbreviation of a French word, Réseau IP Européen. I'm not any good in French, but European IP networks. So abbreviations like this is very favorable in our community, so I guess we owe Daniel Karenberg for coming up with this one in the early days. RIPE NCC is an incorporated organization based in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and we also now have an office in Dubai, where Paul is based. And we also have 2 employees in Moscow these days. So we're trying to expand a bit in the geographically, but we're still headquarters in Amsterdam, while most of the staff is probably at some meeting or another in the region. It's set up to be a secretariat for the RIPE community, and it soon also became the RIR for Europe, the Regional Internet Registry for Europe, Middle East, and parts of Central Asia. It's kind of the former Soviet Union part of Central Asia. It's got 11,000 plus members, as you just heard, and it's a non-for-profit. So the operations of RIPE NCC is covered by a membership fee. If there is a surplus, which there has been the last several years because the number of members grow during the year, then that surplus is put into a reserve, and then usually the membership fee is lowered the next year coming. And the RIPE NCC has a substantial reserve so that if something happens, like in the 2000 when the internet bubble busted, it still has money to continue the operations for a year or 2. So, and here's the logo of the RIPE NCC that you've probably seen on ripe.net, right? So this is easy. So not just an RIR, but also formed to act as a secretariat and carry out activities on behalf of the community. Enable communication between the community, meetings like this, And we got the blessing from the community shortly after it was formed to act as the RIR. But we don't only do numbers in RIPE NCC. Also operating the K-route, route name server in Europe, provide technical trainings for members, as you had the whole of yesterday for. RIPE Atlas, as you will hear more about, and if you wonder what Atlas is, talk to Vesna, she can tell you that. And we have RIPE Stats, so if you want to search in all the data from Atlas or from the RIPE database or routing registers or anything like that, RIPE Stat is the place to go. And we're doing regional meetings like this. So, short recap, RIPE formed in '89, RIPE NCC in '92, community open to all, membership organization, creates policies, administer policies. RIPE does not allocate number of resources, RIPE NCC does. RIPE has working groups, and RIPE NCC has an executive board. So it's the open community versus the membership association. So one of the things that's popping up in the internet governance world these days is accountability. So what do we mean by accountability? Does the RIPE NCC has any accountability? Well, you've seen all the RIPE NCC staff here. If they don't do what they're supposed to do, they're accountable to their managers, so ultimately to Axel Pavlik, the CEO of RIPE. Axel, have you come? No, not yet. So if he doesn't do what we expect of him, then he's accountable to the board. So if you're not satisfied with the RIPE NCC, you can talk to the board. And if you're not satisfied with the board, then you attend the General Assembly and you elect somebody else for the board. Or if you're satisfied with the board, you vote for the current board members to make sure that they continue the good work they're doing. So actually, it's the members that controls what the RIPE NCC does, as in any other corporation. The owners elect the board selects a managing director, and so on. Now, if the members get in disagreement between themselves or with RIPE NCC, we've established a mechanism for arbitration. So there is a panel of arbiters. So if there is a conflict, it can be taken to arbitration, which is a low-cost conflict resolution mechanism. So you don't have to spend a lot of money on lawyers and going to court and so on. So it's a very lightweight, community-based process. And then to make sure that the RIPE NCC doesn't decide on who gets numbers, we have the RIPE community set the policies. So the community sets the policies and the RIPE NCC executes them. And there is a whole document here developed by the RIRs describing the accountability mechanisms in all the regions. So in RIPE, we do work by working groups, and here's the list of the current working groups, and these are formed by the community based on what interest do we have right now. So in the past, we've had some more working groups in other areas, like ENOM, which was closed down, and we have new ones like open source popping up. If I'm going to highlight some of them, sort of building the bottom-up inclusive and open processes that we're working with, it's definitely the address policy, to make sure that the community decides on the addressing policy for the region. It's also the RIPE NCC activity plan being discussed in the services working group. So it's not only an activity plan approved by the board, it's actually discussed in the community before the board approves it, so we can give input to the board to make sure that RIPE NCC does what we as the community wants it to do. Governments are welcome in all the working groups. As mentioned earlier, we don't have separate seats for governments. We don't have red chairs for governments and blue seats for others, but they're more than welcome. Some of them actually are quite active participating. Some of them are learning from the meetings and taking that back to local forums to have cooperation with the local industry. And there is a special working group, the cooperation working group, set up for relationship with governments, with intergovernmental forums and other internet governance bodies to discuss matters of mutual interest there. Okay, I've talked a lot about policies. So how do we decide on policies? Now, I'm not going to say too much about that because then I will take away the whole talk of Marco coming after me. But highlights is that anybody here, if any of you wants to propose a policy, you can do so. Then there is a process for discussion, for documentation, for declaring consensus, and so on, by the working group chairs. The RIPE NCC Executive Board does not have a say in the policies. That's decided by the community, by the working group chairs. That's unique to the RIPE processes, but we believe it's important to have a clear separation between the policies and the implementation of the policies. So I've taken you through the RIPE Open Community, the RIPE NCC Membership Association, the working groups, and accountability, and the policy development process. So then we had a session this morning on internet governance and what's going on. So you all heard about NTIA. Who knows what NTIA is? Very few. Who knows who your local telecom regulator is? Oh, not that many. Okay, NTIA is the US regulator, right? So the US regulator has a special relationship with ICANN regarding the IANA function. And this includes the management of the global addressing pool. So which RIRs get which addresses to distribute to the region. And there is a process going on in order to figure out the mechanism to manage this after the NTIA steps out of this function. I'm not going to repeat everything Paul said this morning about this, but I'm going to focus a bit on what is IANA. IANA is very simply a very small registry. I mean, it's not that many addresses to keep track on when you look at just the blocks. The registries in the regions are much bigger because we have kind of like 11,000 members in the RIPE region, so it needs to be at least 11,000 entries, right? In the IANA registries, we have 5 RIRs, so it's much smaller order of magnitude. If I take you directly to the IANA website, you can see that there are actually 3 areas of registration. If we start at the right, and that's actually the source of this. IANA was started according to the folklore when John Postel was the only one bringing a book to the working meetings of the ARPA projects, designing the internet protocols, and he got to write down the protocol parameters when they discussed designing the protocols. So that's the sort of the core of the registry is which port is SMTP, which port is HTTP and DNS and so on and so on. Now we have one protocol that's kind of special, and that's the internet protocol. And each internet packet has 2 key parameters. It's the source address and the destination address. So these protocol parameters, the IP addresses, are kind of specials. And the management of those have been delegated from the IETF to the RIR communities, so we actually get to manage the policies for those. So while it's kind of a separate registry, it's closely linked to the protocol parameters. Now, there is another protocol that's even more special, and it's the DNS. If you go to ICANN meetings or read about this in the papers, you would think that the internet is all about names and DNS. And that's probably because that's where all the money is, or people think all the money is, because you can sell domain names and make a lot of money. So if you want to make more money, you just create more names, which is the game that ICANN is currently in. I'm not really sure about what the naming industry is really all about. I mean, I thought it was more about providing services over the internet, but hey, I don't know all about this, right? So that's the third aspect of IANA, keeping track of the top-level domains. So I said that there is a special contract between NTIA, and looking back in history, it's quite interesting that when ICANN was set up, this contract was transferred from the ARPA projects, the research project within the US government, to the regulator. And then the idea was that ICANN would be set up and take over the sort of management of this. And now we are 15, 16 years later, and now suddenly NTIA decided that it's time to step out. So this has taken an awfully long time. But this is actually what ICANN was set up to do in the first place. And then, of course, a lot of things have happened, among other things that the whole domain name supporting organization in the original ICANN design has been moved into ICANN, and the ICANN board is dealing mostly, if not only, with domain names. So ICANN is very different from when this was designed. From the addressing point of view, IANA has a very simple task. It works according to global IP addressing policies. So we have 3 global policies. One for IPv6, that was the easiest one to get in place in 2006 because we weren't using v6 that much and we were handing out big blocks so you don't have to execute it that often. Then the ASN numbers, was the next one, and then V4 was the last one to come in place. We had been doing V4 successfully for so many years, so it wasn't really needed to start on that one. And there is a fourth document as well that's gone through this global process, which is the criteria for setting up a new regional internet registry. And that was used when Afrinic was set up and LACNIC was set up. So what's the global policy process then? I told you about the regional one. The global one is really simple. You just take your proposal and then you take it through all the 5 regional processes. They're slightly different, but you just have to travel around the world or get help from the registry staff or your members on the address council to shepherd this process through all the regions. You don't have to be there physically. You can do most of this on mailing lists if you really want to. And then when there is consensus in all 5 regions on one proposal, the address supporting organizations, address council, or number resource organizations, number councils, which is the same thing, looks if the process has been followed in other regions, so they don't get to have an opinion on the policy. They just check that the process has been followed, and if it has, they send it to the ICANN board. The ICANN board asks advice from the address council what to do with it. Well, we sent it to you for approval, so that's what we want you to do with it, right? And then they can either approve it or sort of ratify it or send it back. And if they send it back and we run it through the process again, and we do that a couple of times, then it still passes as a policy. So there is some check and balance with ICANN board in the policy process, but really the power lies in the communities and in the bottom-up process. And this is very different from how ICANN does this in domain names, where the policy decisions are made by the board. So Paul took you through a lot of this with the process in the regions and putting together the CRISP team, the proposal that's been submitted on the January 15th, and the ongoing discussions on how this has been put together. So I won't sort of go deeply into these details, but what we have right now is a proposal on the table which was then put together by the CRISP team, a coordination team from all the region, based on discussions in all regions. And this has been posted on public mailing lists, and there has been input to this, and most of that has been taken into account, while some of it didn't, because there was not consensus on the list to include it. If there was just one person wanting something in and the others said no, well then that's not consensus. The CRISP team was set up at the last RIPE meeting. I did a call for volunteers, and I had 2 volunteers, Nurani Numpuno from NetNode in Sweden, and Andrei Robachevsky from ISOC. So my job to select 2 members from the 2 volunteers was really simple. I consulted with the RIPE NCC Executive Board and received support for that during the plenary. So the process was described like that and completely open. It's been a lot of work on those, and of course I should mention Paul here as well, because he was then selected by the RIPE NCC to participate in this. All the regions have 1 staff and 2 community members on this team. And over the Christmas they did several phone calls a week, and well, I think we missed Christmas Eve and the New Year's Eve, but it was a really busy couple of weeks to get this finished by the 15th of January. When this is done, it's been sent off to the ICG, which is a team that will take the proposal from the ITF, which has also been completed, together with the names proposal, and make a joint proposal out of this and forward to the NTIA. So what's in this proposal then? Well, basically the community told us at the last RIPE meeting that we have a model that's actually working. We don't need a change. We have a bottom-up, open and inclusive model. We want to keep that. We don't really want to create any new structures. The operational and policy relationships are clearly defined, minimal change, and ICANN has so far provided excellent service, so let's keep it like that. But we want to formalize it. So while the proposal is out, the next thing that comes out is the SLA, so please watch out on the mailing lists. If you're a member of the Cooperation Working Group mailing list, if you're not, subscribe to that, or to the global list. Please read the SLA and see if this is what you think the SLA between the IANA operator and the community should be. So the essence of this new proposal I mean, what we're doing is to take away the special role of the US government, is that the oversight that was done by the US government will now be a contractual relationship between the IANA operator and the RIRs. So we replace a government oversight by a contract. And the community can, through the RIRs, change the IANA operator, just as the NTIA, the US government, could in the past change the IANA operator. So we're moving that power from the US government to the community, and the vehicle we as a community can use is the RIRs. So we want to have a stable solution, so we want short-term to IANA to continue as the IANA numbering services operator. And the reason we're saying numbering services operator is that what we're writing the proposal about is the operator for the numbers. IETF has provided one for the protocol parameters, and the names part will come up with the proposal for the names. So in theory, this could be 3 different operators, right? There is no reason to think that we will split this in 3, but sort of to design it simply, what we're concerned about is how to operate for the numbers. As I said, we will replace the role of the NTIA with the RIRs, representing you, the Internet numbering community. And in order to do so, we will establish an SLA to make sure this works. Then, in order to give the community some direct influence here, we will establish a review committee that will look at the SLA reports from the IANA operator and give advice to the RIRs on whether actions are needed or not. And then there are some details into intellectual property right, like who owns the IANA.org domain name and so on. So the principles of the SLA is lined out in the proposal. I'll not take you through all of this once again, but basically it's a very standard SLA describing what are they going to do for us, what are the response times and how do we review it, and what if they don't perform, what do we do then? So it's no magic in this SLA. It's a descriptive document saying that we want IANA to do this for the RIRs or actually for the community. Review committee, as I mentioned, advising the RIRs on reviewing the service level and giving advice to the RIRs so that we don't just trust the staff that we have in RIPE NCC, but we also have somebody from community to being tasked by doing this review. And there's going to be equal representation from each region on this. And each region will select this representative through the processes of the choosing of the region. So the way we choose the address council in RIPE, for instance, could be the same process that we use for selecting somebody for this, this position. IANA Trademark, well, somebody needs to own that, and the suggestion here was that the IETF has a function for this, the IETF Trust, so maybe they can take care of the IANA Trademark and the IANA.org domain name. And then this is basically what we end up with then. We have a global numbering community, we have the RIRs, we have a global policy process, and our address council, community elected members from each RIR, checks that the process has been followed. This policy sets what IANA shall do, and IANA hands out IP addresses and in some cases take returns from the RIRs, and we have a complete separation between setting the policy and executing the policy. So, any questions? Either it was very clear or, oh, Dima.
Dmitry Burkov, Rush. Hans, what do you think regarding coordination between RIRs now? Should we have, as previously, you know, we developed global policies only, and we follow this process as you drawn in your presentation. But it looks that last 2 years we have more operational issues between RIRs. You know, regarding IP address, ABPU for transfer between regions, we need some global coordination, but without IANA involvement and ICANN involvement. What do you think about this?
We had one globally coordinated policy in the past, the first V6 policy. That was developed by a global committee and then passed in all the regions as exactly the same policy. But then different regions figured out that we have different needs, sort of introducing provider-independent addresses was more on the radar in Europe than in the US, to be sort of, to give one example. And therefore, there was... It sort of split itself off in separate ones. Now, what we're doing today with transfers, it seems to be a lot of additional work, because if you want to have a transfer between registry A and registry B, some of the registries figured out that, oh, if we want to do that, the policy in the region we're transferring to needs to be compatible with our policy, and it's the need-based criteria that's the contentious thing. So whether it's possible to think that we would have globally coordinated policies in, for instance, this transfer area, well, in practice, we will have to do that in order to be able to transfer addresses freely. But right now, I think some of the RIR communities are not really up to the thinking on that yet.
May I repeat? We really need global coordination, but outside of ICANN, IANA now, what I want to mark. And I ask you about your idea, because it looks like, yes, initially we create all this organization, sometimes artificially, just to support the global coordination and to support ICANN to be inside the process. It was voluntary. But, and I think that it's not necessary to put all our process and all our cooperation inside this process. What's the question? Or you think we should go through ICANN board? I hope no.
Well, if you look carefully, I didn't put ICANN board on that slide.
Thank you.
I mean, they have a formal role. We have an MOU with them, so we're happy to have them ratify the policies as long as they stay to that mission and that MOU. But the real work is actually done by the Address Council and the regions.
Does it work? Okay. Any more questions? We have 4 more minutes. Nope. Okay. Thank you, Hans Petter. Yeah.